I first came across Ryan a little over 2 years ago. We met at a party hosted by a mutual friend, and I have to admit, he caught my eye right away. There was something about him. His jawline and cheekbones seemed like they'd been shaped by a master sculptor with a flair for showing off. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room and make you notice, without even trying. On top of that, he had this way of talking that drew you in. He was smooth, charming as all get out, and there was this spark of cocky confidence in his eyes that, instead of warning me off, only pulled me in further. Before I even realized it, I was head over heels. And when he said he was crazy about me too, well, I didn't stand a chance. Less than a year later, we were walking down the aisle. Now, I know exactly what you're probably thinking, that was way too soon. And honestly, you're right. But back then, I couldn't see it. I was caught up in that whirlwind they call the honeymoon phase, where everything feels like magic and nothing else seems to matter. My friends warned me. My family gave me those looks, you know the ones, but I ignored it all. I told myself they didn't get it, that they didn't know Ryan the way I did. I was happy in love and convinced that was all that mattered. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was, but at the time, I was sure I'd found my forever. But then, about a year into what I'd once called marital bliss, little things started standing out to me, things I just couldn't ignore. Ryan, for instance, suddenly developed this routine of swinging by the gym for a quick workout right after work. At first, I didn't think much of it. He'd always been into staying fit. But here's the thing, we used to have this little tradition. When we'd both get home, we'd shower together. It was our thing. Now, though, he'd walk in already squeaky clean most evenings, claiming he'd showered at the gym because he was too sweaty to wait. I wanted to believe him, I really did, but it started feeling off. And that wasn't all. Business trips, which used to be a rare inconvenience, became much more frequent. The phone calls, too, were endless. He'd spend hours holed up in his study, talking in hushed tones behind a locked door. On the rare occasions I managed to walk in before he noticed, he'd jump like I'd caught him in the middle of robbing a bank. I tried to push the doubts aside, but eventually, the pieces started clicking together in my head. I came to the conclusion you've probably already reached yourself. And so, I decided to hire a private investigator to find out the truth. Well, Ryan didn't just meet my suspicions, he blew them out of the water. He wasn't just cheating, he was juggling affairs with not one, not two, but 6 different women. 6. I couldn't believe it. The detective sent me photos, and let me tell you, those images told me everything I needed to know. That night, when Ryan finally got home, later than usual, of course, he gave me some story about his boss being a jerk and how he'd had to stay late. He crawled into bed beside me and drifted off to sleep like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't just been out living a double, maybe even triple, life. I didn't say a word. I didn't confront him, though every fiber of my being wanted to scream at him right then and there. Instead, I made a decision. I would let it play out a little longer. Underneath the anger, I found myself filled with a strange, almost morbid curiosity. I wanted to see how far he was willing to take this charade, how long he thought he could keep it going without me catching on. Maybe it was spite, maybe it was disbelief, or maybe I just needed more time to process it all. Whatever the reason, I decided to wait and watch. In the weeks that followed, Ryan's web of lies grew more intricate, almost as if he were trying to see just how ridiculous his excuses could get before I'd stop believing him. One day, I noticed scratch marks across his shoulders, and when I asked about them, he spun a tale that was so absurd, I almost laughed. Apparently, he'd slipped and fallen at work right as a coworker was opening a drawer, and the edge of the drawer had just happened to leave those perfect little marks on his skin. Another time, he came home smelling strongly of women's perfume, the kind that practically screams for attention. When I asked about it, he shrugged and blamed Katie for marketing, saying she didn't understand the concept of personal space or moderation and had hugged him a bit too enthusiastically. The part that got me the most, though, was how effortlessly he delivered these ridiculous stories. He'd look me dead in the eye, calm as could be, and explain away every suspicious detail with the confidence of a seasoned liar. Honestly, I had to give him some credit. His ability to lie without batting an eye was impressive, in a twisted sort of way. Despite everything, we were still sleeping together. Say what you want about Ryan, but the man had a body that looked like it belonged on the cover of a fitness magazine, and in the bedroom, he was nothing short of incredible. Yes, he was a lying, cheating piece of work, but I had my own needs, and I figured, why not take advantage of what he was good at? It wasn't like I was planning to forgive him or pretend everything was okay. This was just me getting something out of the mess he'd created. Meanwhile, I had the private investigator take things a step further. This time, I asked for video footage, of course, only what he could capture in public spaces. Watching the recordings was like peeling back another layer of who Ryan had become. Every single one of those 6 women seemed completely captivated by him, just like I had been in the beginning. They smiled at him, hung on his every word, and laughed at what I could only assume were his stupid jokes. But there was one woman in particular who stood out, a young girl who couldn't have been more than her early to mid-20s. This one, though, wasn't just charmed. No, she looked downright obsessed. In one clip, she leaned in closer to him at a crowded restaurant, her smile wide and eager. She laughed louder than anyone else at the table, scooted her chair so close to his it might as well have been in his lap, and kissed him in full view of everyone like she didn't care who was watching. Later, when he dropped her off at her place, she clung to him as though letting go wasn't an option. Her intensity, her need to be close to him, it was something else entirely. I'd be willing to bet those scratch marks on his shoulders had come from her. Her name, according to the detective's report, was Ashley. Not long after, Ryan's carefree attitude started to unravel. The calm, confident man I had once known began showing signs of irritation and anxiety. Whenever he was on the phone, which was often, his voice had this sharp, angry edge to it. Whoever was on the other end seemed to be pushing all the wrong buttons. Sometimes his phone wouldn't stop ringing. We'd be in the middle of dinner, and it would go off. He'd pick up, tell the caller they'd talk later, hang up, and then, like clockwork, it would ring again almost immediately. This back and forth would continue until he finally shut it off, his jaw tight with frustration. It didn't take a genius to figure out who might have been on the other end. My suspicions were confirmed one evening when I caught him whispering angrily into the phone, "It's over, Ashley." His tone was sharp, like he was trying to end whatever was going on for good. Poor girl. Honestly, I felt a twinge of sympathy for her. But at the same time, I couldn't entirely blame Ryan for wanting to cut ties. From what I'd seen, she did seem like the obsessive type. Still, I couldn't help but wonder. A few days later, I decided to orchestrate a little chance encounter with Ashley at the mall. By now, I had let the private investigator go. His services were no longer needed, but not before he'd given me a detailed rundown of Ashley's schedule. I felt she deserved to know the truth about the man she clearly thought the world of. So I approached her, introduced myself with a simple, "Hi, I'm Ryan's wife." Just those 2 little words, Ryan's wife, were enough to make her face crumble. She looked like someone had just dropped a bomb right in front of her. I kept my voice calm and steady as I told her how sorry I felt for both of us. I said neither she nor I deserved to be lied to like this. I might have been jealous of you, I admitted, if you'd been the only other woman. But how can I be jealous when there are so many others? That last part seemed to hit her like a ton of bricks. Her eyes went wide, and she stammered, What? I stood there, watching as the truth sank in, her world clearly turning upside down. And for a moment, I almost felt guilty. Almost. I went on to tell Ashley everything, every last detail of Ryan's affairs. I showed her the pictures the detective had given me, listed the names, and told her she deserved so much better than this. I said she should cut her losses and move on with her life. When I finished, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, shell-shocked. Now, all I had to do was wait. The phone call came on a Friday afternoon. The night before, Ryan hadn't come home, and being the concerned wife, of course, I'd made the rounds. I called his friends, his office, his parents, even his gym. Nobody had seen or heard from him. That's when I found out his secretary hadn't shown up for work that day either. The pit in my stomach deepened, but I kept up appearances. Then the call came. It was a police officer, and his tone was urgent. He told me to come down to the station immediately. My heart raced as I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. When I got there, I was met with grim faces and even grimmer news. Ryan and his secretary had been found dead in her apartment. Their skulls had been brutally crushed. The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then the anger I'd been holding onto, the anger over all his betrayals, rose up inside me like a tidal wave. I let it out in a storm of tears and screams, collapsing into the chair they offered me. The officers, of course, thought my reaction was one of pure grief. No acting was required. As the investigation unfolded, the truth about Ryan's infidelities began to emerge. The police asked if I had been aware of his affairs, and I admitted that I was. I told them Ryan had confessed to being a sex addict. I explained that he had claimed to love me, that these other women meant nothing to him, just objects of momentary pleasure. I assured them we had been planning to seek counseling to save our marriage. But then, a curious development caught everyone's attention. Ashley, one of the women Ryan had been involved with, had suddenly vanished. She had quit her job and vacated her apartment the day before Ryan was found murdered. It was as if she'd disappeared into thin air. Now, I can't stop wondering if I should leave town. What if Ashley decides to come after me next, simply because I had the misfortune of being married to Ryan? But deep down, I don't think I have much to worry about. Because as unhinged as she might be, I suspect I'm even crazier.